This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. The U.S. defense chief calls on South Korea to take a bigger role in deterring the North. Pete Hegseth also praising Seoul's plan to increase military spending. Well, that spending plan unveiled by President Lee Jae-myung in a record budget for 2026. That includes tripling funding for artificial intelligence. China and South Korea mourn North Korea's former ceremonial head of state, Kim Yong Nam, praised by Beijing as an old friend. He was 97. And Starbucks localizes its brew as selling control of its China business in an attempt to bring a caffeine kick into its flagging fortunes. Also in East Asia tonight, Japan's new leader wants to meet North Korea's Kim Jong Un to secure the return of abducted Japanese citizens. We'll explore her chances of succeeding where other leaders have failed. The Trump administration says its alliance with Seoul will remain focused on defending against North Korea, even as it looks at flexibility in how its forces in the South can respond to regional threats. A visiting Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth praised South Korea's plans to raise its military spending. He says that Seoul will take a larger role in defending itself from Pyongyang as the allies brace for contingencies outside of the Korean peninsula. CNA's senior correspondent Lim Yun-suk with this report.
Speaking to reporters on Tuesday, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said the United States would fully support South Korea's plan to develop nuclear-powered submarines, a project approved earlier by President Donald Trump. South Korea is currently prohibited from reprocessing spent nuclear fuel or using it for military purposes without U.S. consent. Mr. Hegseth said the move would strengthen South Korea's national defense and its alliance with the United States.
Minister Ahn and I discussed practical steps that we can take to modernize the alliance, and I'm greatly encouraged by Minister Ahn's commitment to increase defense spending and to make greater investments in ROK military capabilities. This includes critical missile defense and space capabilities that our forces need to preserve the peace and prevail, God forbid, in war.
South Korea says it expects to be able to launch a nuclear-powered submarine by the mid to late 2030s. But some critics told local media that Washington's real aim in backing the initiative is to use it to upgrade America's shipbuilding industry. President Trump has said the submarine will be built at a Philadelphia shipyard, which analysts say currently lacks the capability for such construction. But they agree that a nuclear-powered submarine would significantly boost Seoul's ability to deter North Korea and counter its growing submarine fleet. Mr. Hegseth also announced plans for U.S. warships to be maintained and repaired in South Korea.
And Minister Ahn and I also discussed strengthening our readiness by energizing our defense industrial cooperation across the alliance. For the first time in history, we agreed to demonstrate the ability to maintain and repair U.S. warships here in Korea, and doing this will harness this country's world-class shipbuilding capabilities.
South Korea's Defense Minister An Gi-baek also reaffirmed that Seoul would not develop its own nuclear weapons.
한반도 비핵화는 흔들림 없는 약속입니다. 대한민국은 NPT 체제에 가입된 나라로서 핵을 본질적으로 가질 수 없는 나라입니다. 우리가 핵을 가질 수 없기 때문에 미국의 핵과 대한민국의 재래식 무기, 그래서 CNI가 체제가 구축이 된 것으로 이해를 해주시기 바랍니다.
All these moves come as Seoul works to eventually take over wartime operational control of its combined forces from Washington, part of an effort to make the alliance more balanced and more flexible in the face of new regional threats. Meanwhile, North Korea fired multiple artillery rockets about an hour before Mr. Hegseth visited the demilitarized zone on Monday afternoon. According to the Defense Ministry, about 10 rounds were launched into the northern part of the West Sea, also known as the Yellow Sea. Lim Yun-suk, CNA, Seoul.
China and South Korea have extended condolences over the death of North Korea's former nominal head of state, Kim Yong Nam. Beijing calling him an old friend who made significant contributions to good relations with Pyongyang. State media say the 97-year-old died yesterday from multiple organ failure. A state funeral will be held on Thursday.
Kim Yong Nam is not related to Kim Jong-un, but his lifelong loyalty to the ruling dynasty allowed him to serve as North Korea's ceremonial head of state for 2 decades. Born into a so-called patriotic family, Kim Yong Nam joined the ruling party in the 1950s and survived major purges in the 1970s to be appointed to the powerful Politburo. Starting in 1983, he served 15 years as foreign minister before becoming the ceremonial head of state in 1998. As the face of North Korean diplomacy, one of his most high-profile visits was to the south in 2018.
김영남 전 위원장은 2018년 평창 동계올림픽 당시 북측 대표단을 이끌고 방남하여 남북 대화에 물꼬를 트는 데 기여하였습니다. 또한 2005년 6월과 2018년 9월 두 차례에 걸쳐 평양에서 김영남 전 위원장을 만나 한반도 평화와 남북관계 발전을 위해 의미 있는 대화를 나누었던 기억이 납니다.
While meeting South Korean officials in 2018, Mr. Kim yielded the seat of honor to Kim Jong-un's powerful sister, Kim Yo-jong. His deference to the ruling family offering a clue into how he was able to survive the frequent political purges. Mr. Kim was replaced in 2019 at the ripe old age of 91 after serving all 3 of North Korea's leaders.
Now, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un seems to be ready to meet U.S. President Donald Trump again. South Korean news agency Newsis is reporting the development, citing South Korea's spy agency. Now, Mr. Trump said last week that he expected to meet with Mr. Kim in the not-too-distant future, and that he is going to aim to straighten out tensions between North Korea and the South. Well, there was talk of a Trump-Kim meeting last week when the U.S. president was in South Korea, but he says the two sides weren't able to work it out. Mr. Trump says that at some point the U.S. will be involved with North Korea and that both sides want that. The two leaders have met 3 times before, once in Singapore, once in Hanoi, and once at the border separating the 2 Koreas, when Mr. Trump became the first sitting U.S. president ever to set foot on North Korean soil. Now, as the U.S. works to reassure allies that it remains engaged in the security of the region, it is planning to ask a UN Security Council committee to impose measures on 7 ships suspected of violating world body sanctions on North Korea. Now, a U.S. official says the 7 vessels are alleged to have illegally exported North Korean coal and iron ore to China, which traditionally earns Pyongyang up to $400 million a year. The Security Council's 15-member sanctions committee could impose an asset freeze on the ships, ban them from entering ports, and require the country of registration to deflag the vessels. But it's unclear if the measure will pass, as Russia and China, allies of North Korea, are on the committee. Pyongyang has been under UN sanctions for its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs since 2006. Those measures have been strengthened over the years, but the Council is now deadlocked as China and Russia push for the measures to be eased to convince North Korea to return to denuclearization talks. Chinese President Xi Jinping says that he is seeking to boost mutual investment during talks with Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin in Beijing. Well, the two men met at the Great Hall of the People. Prime Minister Mishustin is looking to stem a recent slowdown in trade with China, while Moscow continues to be weighed down by Western sanctions over its war in Ukraine. Mr. Xi says that external conditions are turbulent, but affirmed Beijing's commitment to advance ties, especially in industries such as energy, agriculture, aerospace, and the digital economy.
我同普京总统在莫斯科和北京2次会晤，就中国关系中的战略性、全局性问题深入交流，做出新的谋划和部署。我也希望你落实好我和普京总统达成的重要共识，着眼于两国和两国人民的根本利益，把中俄合作蛋糕 做事做好。
Well, meantime, China has dismissed Taiwan's safety concerns over its hosting of the APEC summit in Shenzhen next year. But the Chinese Foreign Ministry says Taiwan's participation lies in its compliance with the One China principle and the relevant APEC Memorandum of Understanding. The grouping is one of few international bodies Taiwan is a member of, though it takes part as Chinese Taipei to avoid political issues. Now, a Taiwanese Foreign Ministry official has urged China to fulfill promises to ensure safety of all participants and the equal participation of the economies. He says that Beijing had provided written assurances about the safety of all participants last year. But China was angered during this year's summit after Taiwan's representative, a former economy minister, Lin Xin-yi, met with Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi in South Korea. Japan and all the other APEC members have no formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan. China views Taiwan as part of it, but the island's government has repeatedly rejected the sovereignty claims. Lockheed Martin says it's working to speed up deliveries of F-16 fighter jets to Taiwan. The island has complained of repeated delays even as it faces a rising military threat from China. Taiwan's Defense Ministry told lawmakers that all 66 F-16V jets were originally set to arrive by the end of next year. But due to production line relocations and disruptions, only 10 are expected to undergo flight tests and be delivered by that time frame. Meanwhile, a torpedo order from Lockheed as well as an order of bombs from Raytheon have also been delayed. Taiwan is beefing up its military equipment as China steps up pressure, sending warplanes and warships close to the island almost daily. Taiwan's President William Lai has promised to ramp up defense spending to 5% of GDP by 2030. But that plan could be struck down in a parliament that's controlled by the opposition, Kuomintang. A time now for a short break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi aims to put together a new growth plan for the nation by next summer. Hello there. Great to have your company on East Asia tonight. We've got Roland Lim joining us now for the very latest in business news. And today we're talking about this major shakeup in China's coffee scene where Starbucks is actually trimming its China exposure. Tell us more about that.
Yes, in the last few years, Starbucks has lost its lead in the market that it helped create with local chains like Luckin and Kuti Coffee muscling in. Now, it seems that going local might be the only way to compete. The U.S. coffee chain selling a majority stake in its China business to private equity firm Boyi Capital in a deal valued at $4 billion. Now, Boyi Capital is reportedly in talks to raise a loan of about $1.4 billion to support its acquisition. The deal allows the joint venture to oversee Starbucks' second largest market, operating nearly 8,000 stores. Boyi will hold a 60% stake in its retail operations, while Starbucks will retain 40%. Remember, Starbucks entered China almost 30 years ago and has been credited with growing coffee culture in the country. But in recent years, it has struggled to compete with cheap, fast-growing Chinese startups like Luckin Coffee. Well, to talk more about the competition that's led to the deal, Jason Yu, General Manager, CTR Market Research, joining us live from Beijing. Jason, Starbucks often credited with creating China's modern coffee culture, and then it started losing market share as the market matured. What were the early moves that worked, and what's changed since?
Well, Starbucks entered the China market pretty much in 1999. Before that, obviously there are coffee chains. There were coffee chains in China, but they were not scaled coffee chain operations. And the Starbucks was really, really successful in terms of introducing this third space concept to the Chinese consumers, where it really created a new space for consumers to enjoy coffee, learn about coffee cultures, and having social interactions in this space. Pretty much, I would say that Starbucks was the pioneer of the coffee culture in China, and helped to cultivate the coffee market in China over the past 26 years. And many of the Chinese companies start to follow Starbucks' footsteps in terms of developing this lucrative market.
So why a local partner now? I mean, what can Boyu offer that Starbucks couldn't? I mean, specifically, what can they deliver in, say, the next 12 to 18 months? I mean, access to lower tier cities, supply chain, digital tie-ups?
Yeah, well, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, that Starbucks experienced the fierce challenges from the local competitors who have learned from Starbucks, but they were able to actually run the business much more efficiently, launching new products much more quickly, and expanding their store coverage much faster than Starbucks. So in this case, Starbucks will have to look for a partner that really helps them to kind of compete more effectively in the next phase of development. Boyu came at the right time because it already owned a very large portfolio of investment in China, including a lot of the consumer product, retail infrastructures, as well as other supply chain logistics networks. So a local partner obviously will help Starbucks to react to the local challenge much faster, much more agilely. And at the same time, I do believe that the wide investment portfolio of Boyu will help to connect Starbucks to this new ecosystem that help Starbucks to actually develop more quality growth in the next phase.
Well, Lockheed now has some 20,000 plus locations, and Kuti is also scaling up fast. So where is Starbucks share going to come from? Are we talking about sit-down cafes being their forte, or is it convenience chains, or even home coffee products from Starbucks?
Well, I don't think there is a simple one answer to address your question. There are probably going to be a combination of different strategies. For example, opening more Starbucks Now kind of restaurants, which are much smaller, more efficient in addressing the takeout needs. Talking about working with the other consumer products like Nestle's in terms of the coffee pots market, as well as developing a real local supply chain, sourcing more coffees from China locally, thus avoiding risks in the global supply chain. So I guess having a local partner like Boyu really helping them to developing a local strategy much more firmly rather than reporting to Chicago all the time. And this really help Starbucks to become a local players in the market to compete more effectively with the other, fierce local competition.
And what about competing with 990 yuan lattes? That's about $1.40 US. That seems like a race to the bottom for me. I mean, Luckin and the others have actually trained consumers in China to expect 990 promos. I mean, how should Starbucks compete against that?
Well, Starbucks already are launching, a lot of different campaigns to lower its price. But I don't think the answer is really about matching the price with Luckin or other local players. It's really about retaining that brand equity, retaining their premium price levels by providing consumers with the right level of customer experiences. And by now, looking at the last 2 quarters of financial report, we do see Starbucks were successful in terms of implementing their strategies by opening more cultural heritage stores, more stores with unique experiences, thus creating a differentiation in the market.
And looking ahead the next 12, 24 months, how do you see China's coffee market evolving? Will it, say, split into two? I mean, everyday affordable coffee for regular drinkers and then premium coffee experiences for status and for socializing?
Yeah, I do believe that China is big enough to accommodate, a number of players. Low-cost coffees or low-price coffee is not the only answer. I do believe that Starbucks have a role to play, and this great partnership will help them to actually sustain and advance that development.
Jason, appreciate you going and giving us the ins and outs of the coffee scene in China. Jason Yu, General Manager from CTR Market Research. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung is putting artificial intelligence at the forefront of the nation's 2026 budget. Now, of the overall budget plan, totaling some $505 billion US, the administration is looking to allocate $7 billion to position South Korea as a global leader in AI that can stand alongside China and the US. And that's about 3 times higher than the current year's spending.
우리는 지금 겪어보지도 못한 국제 무역 통상 질서의 재편과 인공지능 대전환의 파도 앞에서 국가 생존을 모색해야 할 절체절명의 위기에 처해 있습니다. 산업화 시대에는 하루가 늦으면 한 달이 뒤처지고 정보화 시대에는 하루가 늦으면 1년이 뒤처지겠지만 인공지능 시대에는 하루가 늦으면 한 세대가 뒤처지게 됩니다.
South Korean leader is planning to focus AI spending on schemes that integrate the technology into industries, daily life, and the public sector. Now, big bulk of the funds will go into developing talent as well as building related infrastructure. Mr. Yi is also eyeing to foster the nation's physical AI capabilities. Now, he's aiming to do so by combining South Korea's advanced manufacturing base with real-time data derived from its software proficiencies. The AI adoption focus also expanding into the country's defense priorities. Now, President Yi proposing a 8.2% hike in funding to modernize the nation's weapons systems and transform its military into a smart elite force, as well as to reduce its reliance on the U.S. That would mark South Korea's highest defense spending since it increased in 2019. Opposition lawmakers are wary of the president's expansive budget proposals, but it will still likely pass parliament, given Mr. Yi's party majority. A Japanese prime minister aiming to put together a new growth strategy for the country by next summer. Sanae Takaichi says her administration will be looking into implementing fiscal stimulus with responsible, proactive policy. Now, she has promised to boost tax revenues without increasing tax rates as well. The Japanese leader also ordering the consideration of multi-year budget measures and a roadmap to enhance private-public investments. Ms. Takaichi is facing the task of shoring up the economy while addressing ongoing inflation. Now, it's a matter that has fed into voter dissatisfaction and played a major role in bringing down the two previous administrations. So far, she's enjoyed high support rates in public opinion polls. And that'll do it for business, Oteli.
Thanks so much for that, Roland. On that note, we're going to go for a break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, Japan wants to talk to North Korea about its abducted nationals. Will Sanae Takaichi make any headway on this long-standing issue? Well, we'll be speaking to an analyst. Hello there, this is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un seems to be ready to meet U.S. President Donald Trump again. South Korean news agency Newsys is reporting the development, citing South Korea's spy agency. Now, the U.S. defense chief calls on South Korea to take a bigger role in deterring the North. Pete Hegseth also praising Seoul's plan to increase military spending. Now, that spending plan unveiled by President Lee Jae-myung in a record budget for 2026 that includes tripling funding for artificial intelligence. As we were reporting yesterday, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is requesting to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, reviving hopes that Tokyo may be able to resolve the issue of the Japanese nationals abducted by Pyongyang decades ago. Well, North Korea had admitted back in 2002 that its agents kidnapped 13 Japanese citizens in the 1970s and 80s, and they were reportedly used to train Pyongyang's spies in Japanese language and customs. But Tokyo believes a total of 17 were taken. 5 abductees returned to Japan in 2002, and North Korea gave 8 death certificates for the abductees that Pyongyang claims are dead. Pyongyang's position is that the issue was therefore resolved. But Tokyo questions the authenticity of these documents and says the issue is not resolved. Well, Ms. Takaichi says that the abductions are the priority of her cabinet. Since taking office, she has been pushing for more attention on the kidnapped, seeking help from the U.S. The U.S. President Donald Trump had met the families of the abducted during a visit to Tokyo last week. And for more analysis, let's bring in Tamura Kotaro, adjunct professor of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. Well, thanks, Prof, for joining us this evening. So we've heard, Japanese leaders called the abductees issue a top priority before. So this isn't new. But what do you think has changed now, Professor? I mean, in leadership, timing, that is, you think might even remotely move that needle?
I think there's several issues. One is time is running out. As you have mentioned, almost 50 years has passed since abduction issue happening. So abductees' family, abducted themselves, are getting old. So you need to speed up. And this issue has more support and compassion, empathy from Japanese citizens. And it's good for Prime Minister Takaichi's popularity, already 80%. And, in order to sustain, this is an important issue. And I think it's still a long shot, realistically speaking, but Takaichi-san sent something, meeting with President Trump, meeting with Mr. Xi Jinping, and also meeting with APEC and ASEAN leaders, including Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. They have ties with North Korea. So I think it's not a high percentage, but Takaichi-san sent something. She can do something about it.
So not a high percentage. So give us, what percentage are we looking at here?
Realistically speaking, I'll be surprised if it happens. Maybe, honestly, less than 20%, I guess.
Less than 20%. I mean, people are experts are not really hopeful that this can actually happen. But and also there's North Korea's point of view, right? I mean, Kim Jong Un's point of view. He's already said that this issue is resolved. So from his perspective, I mean, what is the upside to even trying to entertain a summit with Japan now?
So the reason why I think probability is very limited is that, North Korea already got the support from Russia and China. So 20 years ago, then Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi made a summit meeting with Pyongyang happens. North Korea was in deep trouble. Big famines are happening, and the economy was almost collapsed. But nowadays, they got the support from Russia and China. But at the same time, the diplomacy of North Korea, the philosophy is hedging for multiple nations for survival. So I think Russia support, China support, deep down to their mind, is honestly is a distrust between them. So I think Pyongyang is understanding there's a need to have a channel with G7 countries. So Japan, having a new prime minister, maybe Japan can be a gateway to bring in the support from US and other G7 nations. So it might be, look like a betrayal from a view of Russia, but at the same time, Russia needs some support from US and G7s for Ukraine issues. So maybe Russia might be understanding North Korea is talking with President Trump, and among the summit meeting, they will touch upon Japan issue, including this issue, and that might reignite Japan's diplomacy with Pyongyang, bringing in more parties into the discussions.
Yeah, so I want to pick up on that U.S. angle there because Prime Minister Takaichi, she did meet President Trump before making that announcement. So how much of this outreach do you think is coordinated with Washington? And also, I mean, does the U.S. have real leverage over North Korea? I mean, as we're reporting now, there might be a chance that Mr. Trump may be meeting Mr. Kim.
So this is already the public information. When President Trump meet abductees' families, it's not scheduled at that time. So only Secretary Rubio would be seeing them. But suddenly, President Trump changed the attitude, changed the plan, schedule, and then suddenly he showed up and greeting them and giving them a word that, I will do something about that. I think that is meaning a lot for Takaichi. So she sends something And now, as you have mentioned in the previous news, U.S. is seeing Pyongyang's leader, and this issue might be included. Although I think it's still a long shot, but as Takaichi-san publicly speaking, so she is aiming having a summit meeting in Pyongyang, means she sends something from U.S., from China, from other parties in ASEAN. I think it can be a good sign.
Right, and also bear in mind that Prime Minister Takaichi, she's barely 2 weeks into this office. I mean, it could be a defining moment for her young administration, even though it has a very slim chance, as we keep saying here. But how much of this diplomatic push do you think is about Ms. Takaichi trying to establish her leadership credentials at home? And also, are there political risks involved if, let's say, the talks stall?
So Takaichi-san keeps saying that she wants to get back strong Japan economically, and she wants to enhance the Japan's position in international stage. So this can be a very good case for her to make her promises happening. So I think Pyongyang issue is the very base. I mean, the most core Japan's diplomatic challenges, because you need to include multiple parties at the same time. Bilateral talks is needed. You need to cut the very difficult deal with North Korea. North Korea is a difficult negotiator to cut a deal. But Takaichi-san yesterday mentioned she will do whatever it takes to make it happen and to bring at least less of them, 12 of them, back to Japan. So I think without some intelligence, without some confidence, she couldn't make it in front of the abductees family. Still a long shot, but I see some hope.
Okay, so let's just finally, just before I let you go, what should we be looking out for, in the next, say, 6 to 12 months that would count as some sort of progress for this deal and for Ms. Takaichi?
First step is the U.S. Pyongyang summit. So the North Korean leaders understand U.S. President's appetite for the reputation as a peacemaker, including winning Nobel Prize. And Takaichi-san, in front of President Trump, she said she will support whatever it takes for President Trump to win the Nobel Peace Prize. I think, this is a win-win situation for Pyongyang and the U.S. To cut some deal, and for the alleviation of the sanctions for North Korea, and to get some sort of the foreign currencies, and to get rid of isolation, diplomatic isolation, and leaning too much toward Russia and China, and hedging to G7 nations. So first step is a U.S. Pyongyang summit. So we can sense the possibility of happening Japan, Pyongyang, Tokyo Pyongyang summit.
Right.
So I think first step is a U.S. Pyongyang summit.
Yeah, and also going back to the abductees' families, this could really be their final chance for closure. Well, thank you as always. Really appreciate your insights there, Tamura Kotaro, Adjunct Professor, Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at NUS. Well, on that note, we are going to go for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight. Typhoon Kaimegi barrels across the Philippines, leaving at least 26 persons dead, displacing tens of thousands more. The Trump administration is set to slash food aid to more than 42 million Americans as the government shut down stretches towards becoming the longest in history with no resolution in sight. The Department of Agriculture, in a court filing, says the residents who receive the assistance will only get half their normal monthly allotment after the government dipped into emergency funding. Judges had given the administration until Monday to provide a plan for how it would pay out Supplemental Nutritional Program, or SNAP benefits, which are also known as food stamps. Now, funding for the country's flagship food aid scheme has been in limbo since the shutdown went into effect more than a month ago. The program costs about $8 billion each month and serves 1 in 8 Americans. Now, the fallout from the U.S. government shutdown comes as millions of Americans prepare to head to the polls today in state and local elections. Now, the gubernatorial races in Virginia and New Jersey are in the spotlight, with Republicans digging into their war chest to bankroll a strong voter turnout in these states. Now, that's because the White House believes it will be much harder to bring out pro-Trump supporters when the president himself is not on the ballot. The race for New York mayor is a key one to watch. Democratic newcomer Zohran Mamdani leads the pack. Now, he's promising programs to help New Yorkers cope with the high cost of living, including taxing millionaires to pay for expanded social programs. Mamdani, who is 34, could potentially become the city's youngest, first Muslim and first South Asian to become mayor. His closest contender is former governor and independent candidate Andrew Cuomo. Trump, who is himself a New Yorker, has threatened to withdraw federal funds if the city elects Mamdani, calling him a communist. Well, earlier, CNA spoke to John Fortier, senior fellow, American Enterprise Institute, and I began by explaining why the stakes are so high for Democrats and Republicans, despite the elections not being federal ones.
It's the first time we've really gone to the polls after Trump's election. So it is true we don't have many elections, but these elections and the ones next year at the midterms are often something of a referendum on how the president's doing. And typically they don't go so well for the president. So the president tends to lose seats in Congress and tends to lose these governorships. So it is the first time voters will weigh in, but it also is not that likely that they will be voting for Republicans.
Okay, so I wonder what this means for ordinary voters, Doctor. I mean, what's really on the line for them in these off-year elections? Are the issues still the same, like economy and cost of living, except Trump owns it?
Well, the actual elections are probably more about state things like education. The Republican governor now of Virginia had run on issues like education during the Biden administration. If it goes back to Democratic hands, it'll move more in a Democratic direction. I think New York City is the most interesting because we have a candidate, Zohran Mamdani, young, and really perhaps the most progressive. He calls himself a democratic socialist, most progressive candidate we will have seen in New York, and proposing some very strong change in the way that New York will be operated.
Dr. Fortier, in California, we haven't mentioned this one. There's a ballot on redistricting as well, because Texas and at least 3 other red states, redrew congressional lines. Now, I'm wondering, has this become another critical battle line ahead of the midterms you were talking about, which will take place a year from now?
It is. It's a lead up to those midterm elections. We usually draw our lines every 10 years after a census, but sometimes states change their district lines in mid-decade. Some Republican states have, and now California is putting it on the ballot to say we also want to change our lines to make more Democrats be elected to Congress in the next year's election. So that looks like it's going to pass. We'll see change all across the country. Perhaps maybe a few seats in the Republican direction will be helped, but it is a battle that's going on in a number of places, and California is the most prominent because it's the largest state, and a number of seats are at stake for the 2026 elections if California voters vote for this referendum, which says draw the lines in a favorable way for Democrats.
Okay. Polls seem to show Democrats are more motivated to vote, even though their view of their own party is near record lows. How do you explain that split, that enthusiasm without affection?
Well, I do think Democrats have problems. They don't have an identity. They won't have a leader until really the 2028 election. But this is a midterm-like election, and that really means it's a focus on the president. And the president's supporters are a little more divided, and the president's opposition is united. They may not agree on all the policy issues, but they agree that they don't like Donald Trump. And so that tends to lead to much more energy from the outside party. So again, in the long run, Democrats have some thinking to do about that next presidential election. But here, the motivation is there to vote and to send a message to Donald Trump and to put some governors and a mayor in place that'll be of their party.
So, Dr. Fortier, assuming, the Democrats win, and they desperately need a win, doesn't this all mean, and this is a point that CNN raised as well, doesn't it all mean, that red states become redder and blue states become even bluer, electric blue, and this just only further, I guess, widens the divide that we already have, or we already see, if you like, in America?
Well, we do have a divide. I don't think we're going to see great consequence because of this election. In the midterm election next year, where probably the same dynamic will be there, the out party will likely gain some seats, and maybe the Democrats will take the House of Representatives. Then we might see divided government at the national level, and that will limit what a Trump presidency can do. So this is a bit of a foreshadowing in terms of national politics of what might happen next year after the 2026 elections.
Typhoon Kalmegi is barreling across the Philippines. At least 26 people are dead, while tens of thousands remain displaced. Well, Philippine weather officials are warning of life-threatening conditions. Large parts of the Visayas region now under the second highest storm alert. The typhoon, known locally as Tino, is packing winds of up to 150 kilometers per hour. And it is forecast to move across the country before emerging over the South China Sea tomorrow. Weather agency Pagasa says the combined effects of Kalmegi and a shear line are bringing heavy rain and strong winds. Now, officials have issued red and yellow alerts across several regions, cautioning of torrential rain and storm surges up to 3 meters high. Parts of the Visayas and Mindanao have been hit by flooding and landslides. More than 160 flights have been cancelled. Maritime authorities are urging vessels to head for a safe harbour and remain in port. Families from low-lying coastal areas have also been moved to safer ground. Now, the Philippines is hit by an average of 20 storms and typhoons each year. With Kalmegi, the country has reached that yearly average. Experts say up to 5 more storms could still form before the end of December. The annual UN Climate Change Conference, or COP30, is set to begin next week. Ahead of that summit, analysts are looking to a landmark UAE consensus made in COP28, which aimed to triple global renewable capacity and double energy efficiency by 2030. Well, questions have been raised over whether nations have been able to make any progress on these goals. Now, we put this question to Adnan Amin, former CEO of COP28 and chairman of the World Energy Council. And he joined us from the sidelines of the APEC Energy Summit in Abu Dhabi.
Well, I think we have to recall that it was an agreement that was only made 2 years ago at COP28. It was a very strongly negotiated agreement because it's a very ambitious target. But the fact that all countries in the climate agreement agreed to triple renewables and double energy efficiency by 2030 made it a very, very strong outcome from COP28. Now, what we are seeing is a growing emphasis on renewables as part of the energy transition worldwide, but which is more limited to more developed markets rather than developing countries. And what we've seen last year in 2024, we had a renewables capacity addition of around 580 gigawatts, which is actually substantially more than the year before. We're expecting a higher growth this year, over 600 gigawatts. But if we look at the target and the fact that 2030 is only 5 years away, to meet that target, we're going to have to add close to 1,000 gigawatts a year. Now, I think what's important in all of this is that the direction of travel is clear. We are increasing momentum. More and more renewables are being added to the global power system. The share of electricity that is renewables now is higher than any other source worldwide. Even in countries like Australia, which are coal-producing countries, for the first time this year, renewables exceeded coal in power generation. So the direction of travel is right. We need more momentum. I think the issue that we really need to address is that we are confident that in markets like China, India, and others, especially in Asia, parts of Latin America and Europe, renewables will continue to grow. It's the developing world that will need to have far more infusion of capital to allow them to contribute meaningfully to this target. But I think that we are on track, given how we're seeing momentum increasing in this, to be very close to that target, if not meet it by 2030.
All right, time now for some headlines from media outlets in East Asia. Kyodo News reports that China is extending its visa-free arrangement for short-term Japanese visitors until the end of next year, following the recent agreement between Sanae Takaichi and Xi Jinping to promote mutually beneficial ties. Now, the Korean Herald says that the Gyeongju National Museum will be limiting the number of daily visitors for an exhibition that shows 6 gold crowns discovered in the royal tombs of the Silla Kingdom. A replica of one such crown was presented to Donald Trump last week. And Nikkei Asia reports that the Japan Self-Defense Forces have begun live-fire training in the U.S. on drone interception, marking a milestone in its response to the threat from unmanned aircraft. And ahead on Asia Tonight, here are some stories that we will also be covering. China may slash energy bills by as much as half for some of the country's largest data centers as Beijing seeks to dominate the artificial intelligence race. Now, climate ministers of the European Union are making a last-ditch push to agree on new emissions targeting before next month's COP30 summit in Brazil. We'll hear more from Brussels. Well, these stories and plenty more on Asia Tonight, 8 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time, right here on CNA. And that wraps up Tuesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And you can always look us up on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for your company.